we've been working with NCR for a few years as well. I've known Brian before that when we were at former companies and he was a client and we got to know each other and did some work together. And NCR Voyix, oh, here it is, I'm sorry. All right, so NCR Voyix, not sure if you knew, but NCR split into two companies, Voyix and Altos. And Voyix is the point of sale equipment company. And so I've known Brian for a long time. I said, Brian, you got to come check out what we're building, this thing called a Polymatic. We were on a run. I was just going to say that, yeah. Yeah, Chris and I and Brian were running. He looks more like a defensive end than a runner, but this guy, he can run me into the ground. He ran in college, so that's probably not fair to, put me to shame like that. Yeah, but yeah, so he was able to come by the office for lunch, and his eyes lit up, and he said, okay, can really make a difference for NCR. And so we, but if you look at the metrics before I skip those, almost $3 billion in revenue, 80,000 platform sites across point of sale with hospitality, retail, restaurants, and so a lot of different industries around the world they have an opportunity to serve on a big, big scale. And so they acquired ketteQ across demand and supply. And then all of a sudden I got a phone call from Brian and said, hold off. I can't tell you why, but things are changing. Start with demand, and I'll tell you what to do next. So we shifted a couple of weeks after signing the agreement, maybe?
Yeah, and we were pretty far along.
Yeah, and so we had to pivot, not knowing why, but we started just with demand. And then, so I'll let Brian tell you his history now, and in his own, that shift impacted his role and his title as well. So you see here that Brian's the corporate vice president in charge of all equipment sales for NCR, so revenue. But when we met him and we started this journey, he was running global supply chain. So it was really his role and responsibilities and title changed in this process as well. So it was a big change from the top of the organization.
Yeah, so over the last couple of years, we did something pretty unique, I think, in the industry, where we had been in a journey for about 7-8 years of outsourcing to contract manufacturers, where we had all in-house manufacturing. And about 2 years ago, we made a decision to take a final step and essentially fully outsource the entirety of our supply chain and operations and engineering to a single partner, right? And the reason, I call that ODM, many of you probably heard of ODM before, outside design manufacturer. We sort of created a new category. I've called it ODM Plus. That's been mentioned in some of our earnings calls and stuff like that. But the plus stands for also the accounting treatment that comes with that, which is net revenue accounting. So I become a sales agent of hardware from my principal, who is my singular supplier. I still own my IP. I still own approval, design, and everything else, but everything's being done by really this partner. It's not a supplier anymore, right? This particular partner, Enikon Corporation, who's based out of Taiwan, they were one of our several contract manufacturers. That relationship has totally changed. So over the last 2 years, we've been in this journey. Now, before we announced that, I was managing a large global supply chain. So went to Mike and said, I need some help in doing this better, managing inventory and everything else, right? Capacity planning across all these different contract manufacturers, complex distribution network all over the world. And again, we went down that journey, and then very quickly, as we got into that, said we got to pause and shift, right? Completely shift. It was a major shift. Like, we were focused on supply, and now we got to focus on demand. And the reason for that is, in this relationship that we went live actually on April 1st, after 2 hard years of working to transition everything, is in that relationship. Some of you may use contract manufacturers, but in those contractual relationships, demand is your most important leverage. Because if you get demand wrong, they penalize you, right? You don't have the internal ability to sort of absorb some of those, let's call it misses or deficiencies, right? Which, if everything's vertically in-house, you can tend to absorb some of those things. They're very quick to pass that back to you. And then in this particular relationship, it's my only leverage, right? Because everything else is controlled by them. I have to get the demand signal right. I have to be world-class now at demand planning, at forecasting, and how we tie off with sales and flow that all the way back to our partner. And so that was a focus. And during that journey, obviously, it created a whole new career trajectory for myself, because I grew up doing supply chain planning, doing operations, running factories, and I was tasked with getting rid of my entire manufacturing supply chain organization and moving it to somebody else. So that's where, also through that process, personally for me, I had, went through a journey of taking over product management and, business operations, all the engineering functions and everything else that were remaining. So kind of reforming, what hardware meant for NCR Voyix as more of a product business, and launching it as a product business in support of our software and service solutions. So it's a very interesting journey. Yeah. And I'll say, like, through that whole, Mike and the team were very, I've heard it before, I think both sessions, just how adaptive. Obviously that was like a major shift. And it was immediate, like, okay, we get it, and let's figure it out, right? Let's rewrite an SOW.
Yeah.
So
now, fast forward 2 years, the relationship with Intercoms is done.
Yeah.
The contract's in place. You understand your responsibilities and role in that process. And so now you look at supply through a different lens, because you still count on supply. You still count on Intercoms in a big way. But when you think about, okay, how do we look at this from a systems and process and people perspective, how do you kind of step into that kind of relationship? When you think about that as far as the priorities of that transformation that's now getting going.
Yeah, I think the first thing that, it's been very difficult already with this relationship. You can imagine, for some of the more IT-centric people in the room, I'm 100% reliant right now on their reporting and our EDI capabilities between two large ERP systems. So the biggest focus for us right now, working with the ketteQ team, is how do we build out that visibility more real time? Not starting with the demand and the forecast and my contractual obligations within that. It's a constraint that I have, and I've got to prioritize against that constraint. So that's number one, right? I need to continue to have the same level of visibility that I had when I owned it, because that's what my customers demand. That's what my sales teams demand, right? It needs to be real time. And then, going from there is how do you get more sophisticated around optimizing around the relationship and how I prioritize them in my demand signal that I'm giving them, right? You can think of it as like master scheduling, but this is it's unique in a way where I'm not master scheduling a plant. I'm master scheduling the entirety of a partner around the world, across many, many, many customers. And then from there, I think we get into more, how do I extend that supply chain visibility and demand visibility into I call it a shadow plan, which I think is very relevant for anybody who's using I have a lot of experience over the last 7-8 years with contract manufacturers. You put a lot of trust into them. You rely on their reporting. The idea of having sort of a shadow mirror plan, where we're sharing data and I can see real time what they're doing and what supply commitments there are and everything else. And I'm not just relying all the time on an EDI feed that's happening at 1 a.m. and whether that report is good or not. I can potentially identify where maybe they have errors in their supply chain and get proactive with them on managing that, where maybe they're not prioritizing the way I want them to prioritize, where they're maybe driving costs that they shouldn't be, because now they're my principal. If they're getting too expensive, my products get more expensive. So I need to proactively work with them to drive cost out, protect myself from future product increases because I'm not good enough at giving them signals. So I think that idea of having sort of that parallel universe of planning, is where we're ultimately trying to get to.
Yeah,
right,
we heard
as a team.
Exactly. Yeah. When I'm listening to you talk, and I'm wondering if you look at the world differently. And I think about Phil Laster yesterday. He talked about bringing value to the sales process so they could grow revenue. Yeah. And so it's not every time that a supply chain leader thinks, how do I help them grow revenue? They have their own set of responsibilities. There's a lot of them, or even has the opportunity to do that. But now it's not just thinking or opportunity, it's responsibility. Yep. So do you look at the supply chain differently when your number one objective is to grow revenue, right?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I think, it's interesting to that degree. Like we did a pilot where we took all the forecasting data from a supply chain demand plan, and tried to look at our installed base, and it was pretty successful. Nate Welsh here in the room, he runs all the demand planning business ops for me. And they ran a pilot where, hey, if we could take all of this demand plan and try to figure out in it where there's untapped sales opportunities that are not identified in the pipeline, right? And how do we go give visibility? Because I have an installed base all over the world. So how do we start taking all that planning data from services and from our past sales that we use for forecasting and identify sales opportunities that a salesperson, an AE, is not seeing? Right, and taking that to them. That's a real time example of I normally probably wouldn't have been doing. That's more of a sales ops type of activity. I think Nate probably feels like he's more of a sales ops person than a planning manager now. But I think that's one of the things that we need to continue to look for of not reactive, just demand planning and forecasting, but creating opportunities through the data.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. And looking at it, you're closer to the customer now. We've heard that a few times, is really understanding. So we have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that we end at noon just because, and we have another session next. But we do have a few minutes, and if anyone has any questions, because this is a unique case study, not everyone's going to go through this kind of change, but maybe there's a question, particularly around outsourcing. How many contract manufacturers were at Clorox, Rick? 145. I would have never guessed that. I remember he told me, and I was like, are you kidding? 145. That's a lot of cats to herd, I bet, isn't it? Yeah. And so that relationship, I'm sure you have to prioritize those 145. These are the ones that we're going to focus on. These we're going to trust maybe a little more. No? Or?
To a certain extent, they were all important.
Yeah. Around the world, yeah. Yeah. So how many people here use contract manufacturers? Right. If you could raise your hand. Okay, not as many as I would have thought, I guess. So a lot of people have their own manufacturing, or maybe it's a service operation. Yeah. But it is prevalent, obviously, in your kind of industry in particular. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the opportunity to sort of vertically integrate digitally with the benefit of contract manufacturing, I think that was impossible, before. We were just relying on sharing of data, right? Yeah. But, I think with the architecture that you guys have and the technology today, it's a real possibility.
Yeah. I like the way you put it, vertically integrating digitally. Yeah. And so, we started this conference, and two words came to mind: faster together. And so, in a lot of ways, that's what you're talking about. You're collecting partners that cover your business, but vertically integrate digitally so that you can go faster together. Right. So
and then I missed the other part of the horizontal integration too. I also spent 12 years at GE, which is where I first met Mike. Spent a lot of time in the services industry. And the Oracles and SAPs of the world just don't do services very well. No, a lot of platforms position themselves as supply chain planning or services planning. And I think we're starting to see the real benefit, and it's not implemented, it's on the roadmap, of where you start connecting in one platform what we're doing on a hardware side and selling new equipment to tying that directly to our service planning, all in one ecosystem. And I think that the benefits you're going to get from just having that sort of horizontal integration digitally is going to be very significant, both for the services side and them being more efficient on inventory and cost, but also feeding information back to the pilot we ran real time of where sales opportunities should be, created by, say, an AI agent. Say, go and call this customer, right? Because we service this now so many times. It's been in the system over time. We're going to collect more data, and we're going to get smarter and smarter at how we, grow, manage our own installed base, which is very, very large.
Right. Yeah, that service event can turn into a sales event.
That's right.
With that kind of information. Yeah, and rather than do a service event and someone else comes in, your competitor, and has their own sales event.
Which happens all the time.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Oh.
So are you also responsible for forecasting returns for repair, or is that
Yeah, so the forecasting for repair returns, we've kind of separated into a separate services supply chain team with this new, I used to have all of the supply chain. So now we sort of split that into a services product team versus a hardware product team. But we obviously work extremely closely with that team, right? They're very reliant on us, and we're very reliant on them. So, and all of my engineering team supports them, or their technical resource, but it is two separate supply chain organizations and two very totally separate sets of supply chain challenges. They have 12,000 vans driving around the world that need to be stocked just right for a 4-hour SLA at your, Pilot gas station or a Dollar General or a McDonald's, all over the world. So that's a very unique set of supply chain planning. Yeah.
Good. Any more questions from anyone? Oh, okay.
So for your contract manufacturing, do you just have one contract manufacturer?
Yeah, I used to have many. That's what makes us unique. Is the principle around this was set up actually by the software industry, where people were online selling software, and they wanted to recognize their revenue as what they call net revenue, which isn't the cost of the products; it's just the incremental markup that they're doing. That was set forth like 12 or 14 years ago. Nobody had actually accomplished trying to do that with physical hardware. The only way to do that is to have a singular principal. So they're no longer a contract manufacturer, they're my principal. And you have to meet certain tenets in order to do that. They own all the liabilities that come with the hardware, but it's still my hardware, right? I set the product requirements, I own the IP and everything else, but squeaky floor here. So yeah, it's very unique in that sense that we're now down to one, and you could imagine the contractual obligations I have now as their exclusive sales agent, of making sure the demand's perfect. And if it's not, and they can penalize me for everything from expedites to inventory and everything else, and all my future product pricing. So if I make mistakes, it goes directly into my margin on every deal. So I'm going to see it real time, right? Instead of it being sort of buried as a below-the-line cost and not actually in COGS, my sales team is going to be beating me up the moment I get a forecast wrong, right? Now I'll probably point back at them a little bit, but
That's right. They didn't meet the forecast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, any other questions? Okay, great, Chase.
Does your contract principal, do they have the ability to do contract manufacturing themselves to help support or do they have to be sole principal?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So they've inherited my existing supply chain with their own contracts. They're allowed to go do whatever they want, probably a year from now. They have to stabilize first. You can't just change the supply chain overnight. But yeah, they inherited my existing contracts with other contract manufacturers, and over time they'll probably insource some of that or come up with new, partnerships and stuff like that. But yeah, it's an interesting. This is a very interesting topic that we could have a whole separate conference on. Yeah.
Great. All right, well, thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much.